because people have to name and claim their biggest fears. I'm concerned about giving the company this bad news. I'm concerned about firing this person. I'm concerned about, actually one of my clients once had trouble hiring senior executives. It's like, what's going on with you? What are your worst fears if you hire these executives? And he really dug deep and was like, I'm really afraid of taking them away from their safe jobs and us failing and it not working out. And so I think those kinds of questions, the deeper questions that really get in your inside, are extremely helpful in understanding your current behavior in the moment.
Alisa, you are very welcome to the ScaleX Insider Podcast. Absolutely delighted and thrilled to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to see you again. It's so fun.
Likewise, we had a lot of fun recently in San Diego, so I'm looking forward to continuing the conversations that we had here today. So very well, because we're very aligned on this, our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So Alisa, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question and such a lofty vision. I would say this. I have a couple of sort of thought starters that come to mind. First of all, my mission is to light 1 million candles. So when I got into coaching, my whole mission was to make a difference, that the work of my hands matter. And I think about lighting 1 million candles because whenever I light a candle of a CEO of a startup, a founder of a startup, or in a large enterprise, wherever I'm working, I know that they're going to then light hundreds and thousands of candles around them. And so I really think about that when I think about sort of scaling that light. And to do that, you have to think about how you're having an impact on this person to enable them to have an impact on other people. And my favorite compliment I get from my clients is when they say, oh yeah, and then they asked me this, and I was channeling you, Alisa, and I said this. And I'm like, my work here is done.
I absolutely love that. Light 1 million candles. And I can understand why your clients actually feel lit up after interactions with you. You mentioned founders of startups, and a lot of the work, the coaching work that you do centers around those founders. Can you share with our audience who may not be familiar with your work how you arrived at the point where your life's work is about lighting 1 million candles?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think like anyone's life work, it sort of was like fits and starts. But basically, I was working at a university. I was a chief of staff to the provost. And at some point, the provost said, you can't manage faculty because they have tenure. And at that moment, I thought, I was very young, but I thought, I don't get it. People will only do what you want them to do. Otherwise, you'll fire them. So it didn't make sense to me. So I was going to go off to business school to explore that. I sort of had a little detour along the way and worked at the strategy consulting group, the Monitor Group. I went to business school with the focus on thinking about why people do things in service of the organization or sadly don't. I got all turned around in business school because the focus there is like, quant stuff. And so I ended up focusing on finance, accounting, and strategy. I ended up exiting into PricewaterhouseCoopers on their so-called 5-year fast track to partner. And I thought my life was all set. I was all set. And it reminds me of that Joseph Campbell quote, if you can see your path all the way through to the end, you are following someone else's path. Your path only becomes clear as moment by moment, as each foot hits the ground. And I am clear now that I saw my path all the way through to the end, and I was following someone else's path. And I had this sort of moment of truth where I thought, I hope I get the flu one Sunday, so I don't have to go to work tomorrow. And then I got the flu. Strong mind, right? Be careful what you ask for. And I just realized this is not it. This is not it. So I had to figure out what was it. And again, the music in my head at that moment was simple: to make a difference, that the work of my hands mattered. And I tried to sort of stumbled around for a little while, and then I met a coach, and I thought, that is what I want to do. That's me. Like violins kind of played. And so I realized that was my like passion and mission in life. That's what I was put here for. And I had another detour. I ended up in the startup world, which was actually very helpful because Obviously, I learned a lot about startups and I had leadership roles. I was a CFO of one startup and the head of strategy of another startup. And that all, of course, imploded in the 2000s. But I had already got my leadership experience. I had already really identified I want to be a coach. I want to make a difference. And I realized I loved startups. So that kind of all came together. And that's where I started.
I love that. Share with me the difference between having clarity of a vision and clarity of a path to that vision, and why we shouldn't have clarity of the path if we have also clarity of the vision. Because what I heard you say is ultimately in this 5 year or 5 steps to partnership, and you're actually the second accountant we've had on this season, or
Ooh,
certainly second finance
sexy.
professional we've had on this season, to join my good self. So I can relate also in PricewaterhouseCoopers. But
Yeah.
you mentioned the 5 step path. How is that different from having a vision for the future by which you kind of orientate now your life's work? I mean, you've a big, bold vision to light 1 million candles.
Yeah.
So just share with us the difference between having vision of the path and the vision itself.
Well, I'm not sure if there's necessarily a difference. I think you have to get the compass right. And I think when I was on the path, it was 5 years to partner, which means a so-called fast track to partner. And if you can be a partner in a in a professional services firm, guess what? Your life's set in a certain way. Your life's set financially, your path is set, you know what's going to happen for the next, 30 years ish. And the issue was not that, I don't think the issue is like having a clear vision of your path. It's making sure, like the metaphor of if you are climbing a ladder, make sure the ladder is leaned up against the right wall. And I think my ladder was leaned up against the wrong wall. And that was the sort of the disconnect for me. I think it can be very powerful. First of all, having a clear vision is actually very helpful. And it's worthwhile to struggle with the deep questions in your life to come up with as much of a vision as you can. For me, my vision really just ended up being to make a difference, to make a difference, to make a difference. So what did that really mean? It meant then finding a coach. And my path was not clear in becoming a coach. And my path was not clear in how I was going to get there, but I just knew that that was it for me. And so I put one foot in front of the other and I tried a million different things and I made plenty of mistakes, and you test and learn. And over time, in becoming a coach and then running my own coaching practice for 25 years, the path has become increasingly clear, but it was certainly muddled in the beginning. And so I think you don't have to wait for the path to be clear before you start. You have to take a step and see where that leads you, and then course correct and take another step, assuming that you know that your compass is your vision is the right one.
Yeah. And I often find it's actually the start that stops most people, because they
Totally.
can't see if there's 10 steps to realizing your vision. When you're a founder and certainly a leader of a scaling organization, the most you're ever going to see is 3. But it's having the boldness, the courage to actually take those steps in the first instance. What I'm hearing you share, the path to partnership was all very clear. It was all very laid out, and it was scripted by someone else. It wasn't
Yes.
scripted by you. I love your wonderful book, From Startup to Grown Up. For those listening, you won't be able to see me hold up, and it looks wonderful here on video because it's set against my black background. Grow your leadership to grow your business. And I'll tell you why I love this. The structure of this is very much anchored in our own approach to supporting and coaching leaders of aspiring scale-ups to ultimately scale with purpose. Leading self first before you lead others, before you lead an organization. In your language, Alisa, managing you, managing them, and then managing the company. In the context of growing up, what is at the essence of leading self first?
Oh, such a big question. Leading self first, as you know, starts with the intention to lead self first, right? The intention to get to know yourself, to get to know, kind of and I talk about this a lot in my book From Startup to Grown Up, like your triggers, your stressors, your biases, the things that, sometimes we want to hide from ourselves. And so really getting to know yourself is such an important part of that first step of managing yourself. And then I would also say there's something around having a reflective practice. It's journaling. It might be meditation. It might be even like a close-knit CEO group, certainly with a coach. It's so important to build the habit of reflection so that you can figure out where you're going, what's going on inside of you, and then make changes and course corrections, whether they're obvious or whether they're not so obvious.
Your best tool is a mirror. I love that. Share with our listeners what you mean by that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just about looking in the mirror and having the willingness and ability to self-reflect, whether you get 360 feedback, whether people are kind enough and bold enough to tell you how they view you, whether you have a trusted advisor or friend and their ability to give you that feedback, or your own ability to kind of see it yourself. All of that is the intention of looking into yourself and really seeing yourself without any artifice, sort of with the veil pulled back. And I think it's so essential that your best tool is a mirror, because everything, and we talked about this, and you do this in your work too, everything starts with you. And when you are deceiving yourself, you will come across as inauthentic, or you will deceive others. When you let yourself off the hook, you will let others off the hook. That's the way it is. And so leadership has to start with you.
Just as you said that, if you let yourself off the hook, you let others off the hook. If you avoid conflict, you will create an environment that avoids having the important conversations. And I'm just thinking, of certainly as I reflect here with one of the world's leading coaches in front of me, perfectionism. What are some of the things that you find in leaders that really hold them back in the context of actually scaling themselves, scaling their teams, and ultimately scaling their organizations?
Yeah, well, you just mentioned one. I think perfectionism is a big thing, because what happens is, first of all, they can be very self-critical when they don't get it perfect. And that always translates as criticism of others, and very harsh criticism of others when they don't get it perfect. Another thing I think holds people back is their lack of understanding where some of their own patterns come from. So one example would be, the way you handle conflict at home because you were taught this growing up, is no one talks about conflict. Everyone just, buries it and it's like, nope, everything's fine. We're not going to talk about it until all blows over. Now, the problem is that when you're in a workplace and other people are used to, for example, in their families, screaming, yelling matches, that then, we come back and everyone's fine an hour later. So you can imagine the screaming, yelling person and we don't ever talk about conflict and we just like suck it all up in our house. When those two come together in any context, certainly that often happens with co-founders. They come together and then they don't know how to deal with each other. Or it's the way the other person is it's scary. I'm working with a couple of co-founders, a couple of sets of co-founders. And with one co-founder pair, there was an interesting dialogue recently, which was, don't you think we should talk out our issues? And the other one was like, no, don't you think if we don't talk out our issues, they'll just blow over? And by the way, it's not right or wrong. It is both. It is definitely the way each of them were raised. And then we talked about their childhoods and their experiences with conflict. But if we don't make the unconscious conscious and explain the kind of rule book that each of them are playing by, if they don't understand it themselves, they're going to get into conflict, which then cannot be resolved. So it's like there's so many other things. I think also just to say the notion of people pleasing. A lot of founders are people pleasers. Some founders are disagreeable, like actually founders kind of can score high on the disagreeable set for the 5-factor human personality types. But other founders are people pleasers, which means they shy away from the hard conversations. They shy away from moving on from an old loyal team member until it's kind of too late. all of this gets in the way of the ultimate goal, which is building a successful business.
I love you mentioned, and it's one of my favorite quotes from Carl Jung, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Yes.
What questions are your go-to questions for us to really open the lids on our unconscious and understand a little bit more about the programming that is not necessarily serving us in the context of leading a scaling organization?
Yeah. It's such a good question, and there are so many, but I think for me, a couple are, when is your first memory of having this experience? Because it always goes back to childhood. Like, for example, I was once working with a senior executive who was a people pleaser. And in particular, he had trouble. He actually could not tell his CEO bad news, period. Like, there was bad news coming. He didn't tell her. By the way, she always found out because it was bad news. I was like, what do you think is going to happen? Okay. And he would always let her be surprised with bad news. And she would lay down these so-called clear guidelines. Don't surprise me with bad news. Just tell me. But for whatever reason, bizarrely, it's very simple instruction, but bizarrely, he couldn't do that. Why? So when did you experience that in childhood? And it turned out that he was the kid who was the good kid at home. And his two siblings were constantly getting in trouble, disappointing their families. So when he was 12, he realized that he couldn't be the kid who brought bad news to his family. ... Right? And so that child is operating in the organization. So I think that's one good question. Another good question is, what would happen if you did this? Or what would happen if? And then it's like whatever we're trying to look at, because people have to name and claim their biggest fears. I'm concerned about giving the company this bad news. I'm concerned about firing this person. I'm concerned about, actually one of my clients once had trouble hiring senior executives. It's like, what's going on with you? What are your worst fears if you hire these executives? And he really dug deep and was like, I'm really afraid of taking them away from their safe jobs and us failing and it not working out. And so I think those kinds of questions, the deeper questions that really get in your inside, are extremely helpful in understanding your current behavior in the moment.
It's so interesting. Having worked with founders who have aspirations to scale, and once they start to open up and you get past the some of the hubris, you find that actually they're oscillating between self-doubt and self-belief almost every 5 minutes of the day. In terms of managing you, leading ourselves first, you mentioned right at the outset some practices. I suspect that, without making the assumption, but that you have certainly experienced lots of different habits and rituals that you have taken some now, embedded them in your own life. What would you recommend to our listeners who have this kind of move between this pendulum of self-belief to self-doubt? How can we stay in a more empowered state of self-belief more consistently, which is more conducive to actually successful scaling? What are some of the practical things, Alisa, that you recommend to your own clients, for example?
Yeah. So one practical thing is you have to think of yourself as an athlete. So what does an athlete do? An athlete eats a nutritious, balanced diet and doesn't eat a lot of junk food. An athlete doesn't drink a lot of alcohol. An athlete goes to sleep on time and gets up on time, right? So like literally that. And an athlete, a world-class athlete, also does visualization practices, which I find very helpful for myself. And certainly I recommend to my clients. So all of this, the sort of tools around just taking care of your physical body and treating yourself like an athlete, when you think of yourself as an athlete, that's empowering. Like, oh yeah, I'm an athlete. I'm in competition. But not only that, the practices that you naturally do that stem from that are also very nourishing for you, right? Nourishing for your kind of your confidence. The second tool I want to give everybody is called the highlight reel. So a highlight reel is like your best of moments, times you overcame challenges, you were super proud of yourself, times you really, I think just really excelled. And when you write down, like literally write down 6 of those experiences. First of all, just the act of writing them or rereading them fills you with feel good chemicals. So one of my clients did this, and he said that he read them every morning after he wrote them down. By the way, he was very skeptical of this, and so just to humor me, he did this write down exercise. And so I wrote them down, read them every morning, and he felt so empowered, like Superman, like he could take on the world. And then he used that momentum to take one very challenging task for him, whether it was a follow-up email he didn't want to do, whether it was like building some sort of document or presentation or something that was very challenging for him. And he would do that. So now you've got the feel-good energy going on with you. You've also accomplished a very challenging task. You can see how that feel-good energy would really last for hours and maybe for the whole day.
Oh, that is brilliant. So it's analogous to, or certainly a take on a positive affirmation, but that positive affirmation is anchored in evidence that is real to you. It's not just I am a wonderful leader. It's actually, here's 6 times when I truly was resilient, when I truly demonstrated courage, when I overcame some significant challenges, and I'm simply affirming those to myself on a daily basis. That sounds very powerful.
Yes, with evidence. That's the point about it. It's not just, I'm nice, I'm good, people like me. It is evidence of
Yeah.
what you've been able to accomplish in your life.
I'm going to indulge myself further. So it's this notion of concept, and I really buy into that in terms of the considering yourself an athlete. And I had Dr. Jim Lear, who authored 17, 18 books, founded the High Performance Institute, and wonderful individual. And he invites also business leaders to think of themselves as corporate athletes. So that really resonates with me. The highlight reel. What else, Alisa? Really, the highlight reel is so super practical. What else?
Well, I think it's also getting a handle on your self-talk. So you're exactly right. We have the pendulum swing, all day long. And by the way, like you may remember that Teresa Amabile at Harvard Business School did like 20-year research or something about people's experience. She had people keep journals for years about their experiences at work. And the insight was, I love this insight. The insight was, people have very intense experiences at work. They do. And you know that, right? Something good happens, something bad happens. You react to it. You mad at your colleagues. You had a good meeting, whatever. Now, with founders, and you know this, founders have an extreme work environment because if you're working in a large company and you lose a customer, you're like, oh, that's so frustrating. I lost a customer. Maybe even my bonus will be impacted, whatever. If you're a founder and you lose a customer, that's like life or death for the company. It really matters. And you can't afford to lose that many customers. As an example, if you lose top talent, it's like this is a disaster because it's going to be hard to fill that person, especially on the time frame you need to. But if you win a customer, if you land funding, if you land that top talent, if your team pulls itself together and does this launch, perfectly and on time, it's like euphoria because this means like, stars and stripes for your entire company. And so just to recognize that you have those mood swings and to have centering activities when you're too high and when you're too low, not just when you're too low. So the idea is that when you're kind of like, just being batted around by these mood swings, it's very helpful for you to take breaths. Like sort of the box breathing, which really centers you. So box breathing is like 4 breaths in, hold your breath for four beats, 4 breaths out, hold your breath for 4 beats, right? That's why it's called a box. It's like 4, 4, 4, and 4.
We practice it before every single mastermind, every single session. I actually became a breathwork instructor. I'm a huge fan of the box.
Oh, there you go.
In fact, for our own meetings, everyone who's hosting on a Monday morning, they start off with a round of guided box breathing. So
yeah,
hugely powerful.
And it's hugely powerful, and it centers you, and so it helps you. The point about you're either being battered around by your emotions or you're feeling yourself in your body and you're having a solid sense of self, a solid core, a solid groundedness. And when you can have a solid groundedness, you can enjoy the ups. That's great. But you're not also going to be so freaked out by the downs. You're going to recognize that There's like a steadiness that you can count on for yourself. And oh, by the way, people around you can count on your steadiness too.
I love that. Super practical. What are the characteristics and traits of founders that are serving whenever they're in that, let's say, in the concept of using the analogy of a human life, whenever they're in that teenage adolescent stage, which I consider kind of the startup phase, into kind of moving into adulthood, what is it that serves them in that startup phase that is actually that is counterproductive whenever they're actually leading, in our parlance, in our language, leading an aspirational scale up?
Yeah. I think that hustle energy, that work all the time, that excitement, sort of the big vision thing, the big vision vibe is actually really helpful in early days of a startup. I think also the sense of like, we're all just making it up here, we can do anything, is very helpful. I think that those things don't serve in the same way as you're getting more mature, right? So when I sort of think about it on your way to grown up, the idea is that you need to be a grown up. You're responsible and accountable for 1,000 people and their livelihoods. You can't just make things up. And even when you do, we all make things up. When you do make things up, you have to make sure that it's rooted in some sense of coherence. You need to communicate a lot more. Because when you're only 8 people or 20 people or 50 people and you don't have good communication skills, whatever, it's fine. Let's all get the work done. And everyone picks it up because they're in the room with you. That is no longer true when you're at 500 or 1,000 people. So you need to develop methodical communication skills, cascading skills, like the ability for your leaders to also tell you what's going on from their people, for you to empower them to tell them what's going on from your vantage point. So all of these kind of like define points of actual management are so essential to build. And I would also say that people like to be like, oh, I'm not a good manager, but I'm a great leader. Like it's a badge of honor. It is not a badge of honor. That means you're just like a mess, You need to have some structure in the way you're approaching your people. You can't just be like, charge the hill, because it's just not going to work.
Tell me more about the challenges that founders have transitioning to scaling leaders. I mean, we actually identified, certainly in our own work, 4 personas of those who really struggle to scale their organizations. What you capture beautifully in your book and so thoroughly is what we term the graduate. And there are 2 types of graduate. There's the newbie CEO, and I was one of those whenever I came from a finance background into a CEO position. And then there's the founder graduate, that graduate who has started this company, has been scrappy, has leveraged that wonderful hustle energy, that can-do spirit, but struggles then when it comes to actually being the CEO that the scaling organization requires. What do you find holds those leaders, those founders back in terms of becoming and graduating to become scaling leaders?
Well, I think there's a lot of things. So first of all, like, do you want to do that? Because I think that founders forget to ask themselves the question, do I want to be the leader that is scaling, or do I want to be the founder who has started this entity? And I think it's really a shame, and we do ourselves a disservice when we assume the same person who started the organization is the one who should build and then lead ultimately the organization. We have a lot of famous examples of people who do that, but there are plenty of people, most people, who don't want to toggle between those stages, right? So it's really back to the mirror, getting a sense of yourself, like, what do I even want? And then number 2, it's recognizing the gaps in your playbook and then filling in those gaps. So, with any founder, certainly a first-time founder, they don't know what they don't know. So hiring a coach is actually very helpful to help them navigate through the things they don't know, but also finding a peer group of, a support group of other CEOs who are maybe a little bit ahead of them on the journey. That kind of thing can also be very helpful to them too. But it comes down to structure. You have to be structured in the way you think about communication. setting OKRs, holding people accountable, leading your team, leading your board. And it doesn't mean you have to be like step one, step two, step three, but you have to have a philosophy and a point of view and an overall mindset and structure about how you're going to handle just the core operational practices of what's going on in your company.
Yeah, I mean, this is the reason why we do what we do, because the founder is assumed to be a competent CEO by virtue of the fact that they've founded this company. Legally, they're a director now of this business. Potentially have taken investment on, and they've given themselves the title of CEO. And the assumption is that they're competent as CEOs, but there's none of us have ever gone to CEO school, never mind CEO scaling school, which is a whole other challenge in its own right. And I think you called out a number of things there, Alisa. The importance of actually being and getting yourself into a room of like-minded peers, others who are going through a similar journey, have similar ambition levels, are facing similar challenges. So critically important, because, and I'd love you to speak to the loneliness that actually leaders experience in scaling up, which seems paradoxical, or there's in the context of, or seems like a dichotomy in the context of actually leading hundreds, if not thousands of people. So you've got that piece, and then the importance of actually having somebody there to mentor, to guide, to coach, to counsel, somebody you trust. Can you speak to those, the importance of the getting yourself into the club and finding yourself the appropriate mentors and coaches?
Yeah, I mean, when you say the club, you mean like a club of
Absolutely.
YPO or
Well, I use the term club. I think I always, back to kind of the notion of being an athlete. I think, whenever I started triathlon for the first time, I hadn't a clue. I shared with you before, I bought a DVD off the internet. I put it into my computer. I tried to simulate the strokes, go into the pool, teach myself to swim. It was
yeah.
only when I joined a club that actually I learned how to swim properly. I got myself, a bike, and all of a sudden, these people that I was cycling with just advanced me so significantly, because they knew what it was to ride a bike. They knew about the gear. They knew about the technicalities of the technique of cycling properly, how to use the gears, all of that good stuff. I just followed, and I think what we tend to do as leaders is kind of assume that people think that we know all the answers, so we're not going to actually be vulnerable enough or humble enough to say, actually, I don't, so I'm going to join a peer group who are
Yeah.
sharing similar challenges.
Yeah, it's so funny. During COVID, especially the early days of COVID, every single one of the CEOs I work with got this question from their employees. When will this be over? When will we go back to office? And they were like, I'm reading the same news you are. I don't know what to say. Right? It's so funny because we're all looking to the leader to answer the questions. I wrote a Forbes article called How Do You Plan for a Future You Can't Plan For? Because that's what we're all going for. And that's what CEOs deal with. I also wrote a Forbes article coming back from our experience together in San Diego at that event. We were part of a peer group ourselves. And I wrote an article about why you should join a peer group and how you how do you find the right one. So like joining a peer group is exactly as you said. You can learn from people around you. And then also you're the CEO of your company or you're the founder of your company. You have skin in the game. You have the pressure on you, but also you get the rewards in a way that your employees just don't. They are employees. If they were founders, they would have founded their own company. So kind of by definition, you can't talk to people inside of your company. So you need to find people around you that you can vent with, you can share stories with, but also you can get practical advice. How do you handle this? How do you handle that? And you can kind of lead each other along the way. And then I think it's important to learn how to vet those groups because it really has to be a group that's going to be relevant to you. For example, some people want to talk through deep challenges they're having at work, and they need a trusted group to do that. Well, you need to make sure this group is set up as a trusted group. And also, there are plenty of groups out there which are like a give and get, like leads organization. That's fantastic, but not what you want if what you want to have is deep conversations. So you have to understand, like, what is the sort of purpose and setup of this group, and is it going to work for me, and is it going to be also, I think it's helpful to try a few groups and try a few experiences so you know if you kind of have chemistry with them and if you feel like this might be useful for you. I just think it's a very I just would say that whenever I'm facilitating a group of founders, yes, they want to hear from me, but mostly they want to hear from each other.
So true.
Yeah.
So, so true. What do you feel provides the greatest leverage to accelerating the progress of your leadership when you have aspirations to scale?
Leverage in terms of what? In terms of skill?
Yes, so your own skill set, your own ability to lead. What do you feel is the greatest source of leverage to do that effectively?
I mean, I think it goes back to what we talked about. Like, it's your own willingness and ability to rapidly learn. So, what does that look like? That looks like looking in the mirror, understanding what you need to do, setting goals to do that, and then putting yourself in a space where you're going to get mentored, you're going to coach from others, you're going to read, you're going to watch online videos, something like that to kind of get yourself in the mindset of being a leader. If you're going to learn to code, you would go watch videos to learn to code, and you would then practice coding. Well, if you're going to learn to lead, you can watch videos and you can, have mentors, and then you got to practice that and go back to the mentors or back to the materials and be like, that didn't work very well. What happened? So I think that is a high leverage activity. I think certainly a high leverage activity is test and learn and be able to do it. And I also think just like, we talked about like this sort of CEO group kind of thing, founders group. I just think also just a personal board of directors. It doesn't have to even be it's helpful to meet with other founders, but it's helpful also to have a spouse or a partner who is willing to tell you the truth. It's helpful to have your best friend from childhood who really gets you to at times like tell you the truth. And so it's about really having people from all walks of life that make sense to you, not every single person, but the people who really make sense, who are able to weigh in at various times to help keep you on course and help you course correct when you get off course.
Yeah, interestingly, not quite childhood friends, but I've created my own virtual board of advisors using AI. So,
I love that. Who's on your AI board of
well,
advisors?
I'll share with you. An interesting mix from past and present. So
Yeah.
I have Sarah Blakely, Joe Dispenza, Abraham Hicks, Charlie Munger, Tony Robbins,
Zig Ziglar.
Naval Ravikant, Zig Ziglar, yes. So, but incredibly powerful in terms of just actually speaking your challenges to, even though it's a virtual board, there is something very empowering about being able to share that, even though it is ChatGPT, and actually getting a response back that feels both compassionate, empathetic, instructive, very, very deliberate in terms of tactics. So I can appreciate the power of a personal board. Let's continue with teams. So we've spoken extensively around the importance of leading self first. In terms of leading others, and you have talked about the importance of actually creating a structure around clear vision, clear goals by virtue of objectives and key results in terms of operationalizing that vision, a structure around communications, that regular cadence. Um, in terms of people and building a team that can actually effectively execute on your vision, what do you know about hiring now and building that team that has likely changed in the last 10, 15 years since you've been doing this work? What is it about the importance of building teams in this current era, this kind of post-COVID remote working era that may not have been necessarily true beforehand?
Well, it may be that it wasn't true and now it's true, but I also think it's just my own sort of maturation. I would say that like in coaching school, as a coach, you sort of get this whole, I don't know, I want to say cliche or like pat view of the world, like you should trust them. A CEO is supposed to trust them. And like, oh, a CEO is supposed to empower the leaders. And I think I now have a lot of sort of maybe contra, what is it? Not controversial, but unconventional wisdom kind of points of view, which is number one, the CEO's role is situational depending on the situation, right? So, like Ben Horowitz talks about wartime CEO and peacetime CEO, and sometimes it's like empower them and trust them sometimes, and sometimes it's like go do this, go do that, go do this. And clarity can be kind in those cases, right? So I think you really need to not just say CEOs should do this and CEOs should do that, but get a real handle on the situation that's going on. The second thing is I used to think it's very much about the leader, and now I recognize it's about the system. So you as a CEO, more importantly than being a great leader and a great CEO, you need to create the right system around you that's going to help you. So if you're the kind of person that's not a great communicator, look in the mirror and realize you're not a great communicator, and don't keep hiring the same person because we can tend to hire us over and over again. Be very mindful of that. Hire a bunch of great communicators, right? If you're somebody who has trouble calling people out or having conflict or direct conversations, whatever you want to call it, hire people who make you uncomfortable because they can have those direct conversations because it's really about the system. And the third thing I would say, I've done a lot of videos on this because I'm so passionate about this topic. How do you motivate your people is the question. How do you motivate your people? Here's the answer. You hire self-motivated people. Right. And then you give them interesting work to do. And I think that people think that the leader is supposed to be, everything to everyone and motivate them and incent them and all these things. But actually, you need to hire the right people and then let them fly. And that's going to help you do a much better job leading your team.
And in terms of hiring those motivated people, what's the greatest test for that? Is this just simply taking a reference on them in terms of their previous work? How do you test for that hunger, that drive, that innate, that intrinsic motivation?
Well, right. So the hunger and drive, those are sort of like slightly loaded words. I would say the intrinsic motivation is what you're going for, and you're also going for certain skills. So yes, reference checking is very helpful. And of course, you want to find references that maybe they haven't even like given you, like folks that you sort of know, we say back channel, but respectfully, of course, as in don't back channel to people who are having a confidential job search. But rather than saying, what are they great at? And then you say, everyone has challenges. What do they need to get better at? Do not say that. Say this. Tell me about a time that they took on work where they didn't have to. They just knew what they were doing and they just did it without even asking or telling anybody. Tell me about a time where they went the extra 3 miles to, complete a task of some sort. Tell me about a time where they saw a problem and suggested a solution and gathered a team and solved it. Those are things that would indicate this person is motivated, right? Self-motivated. And I think that when you ask those kinds of questions specifically, by the way, the next question is, tell me about another time. Tell me about another time, right? Because you want to get like a pattern of this person. Is this what this person's all about? And it's the same is true for the other qualities I was talking about. You want to find a great communicator. You want to find someone who can handle direct conversations, doesn't need to be liked, for example, holds other people accountable, works with this is a very common thing inside of startups, works with the team he has, doesn't make excuses for the team because of the team he wants. And it's like, how do you make the best of and really empower a team around you and try to figure out who's the right person in the right role with an existing team before you can swap all of them out, as opposed to a leader who comes in and fires everybody. Sometimes there's a time to come in and fire everybody, but sometimes a startup would say, we're not ready for that right now. So there's just some few ideas to ask specific questions that relate to the quality that you're looking for, as opposed to what are they great at, which is not as helpful.
Talk about goals and values repeatedly is something you encourage. Tell me about that.
Talk about everything that's important repeatedly, because I promise you, they are not thinking about that. They're thinking about the presentation they're working on. They're thinking about this problem they're dealing with. They're thinking about getting their work done. And so it's just so normal. You're in a company, everyone's running around, everyone forgets what the goal is. Like, for example, with a launch, it's like, I need the color to be green. I need the color to be green. I need the color to be green. I need to advocate for green, as opposed to like losing sight of we're trying to launch this product, which is going to unleash all these amazing things into the world. You don't have to win about the color of the button, right? But you get so entrenched in wanting it your way or wanting to have it go a certain way that it's just easy to forget the bigger picture. And so talk about values and goals repeatedly reminds people of what we're trying to get done. And also, work is really hard. And you're always like working against gravity when it comes to a startup. You need to remember what you're doing it for. And when you talk about what you're doing it for and what's at stake regularly, it is motivating for people.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about the first three principles of our 10 principle ScaleX framework here, the importance of your own psyche and leading self first, purpose and vision, uh, communicating that consistently, repeatedly, and people, the importance of understanding your people, and especially in how they are intrinsically motivated, or certainly hire people who are intrinsically motivated. And something you speak about again in your book, and it's so relevant certainly for many startup teams who are transitioning to scaling up, is the fact that many of them are operating on Zoom. Many of them are remote first in terms of how they exist. How do we kind of build relationships, build trust within those relationships in this remote working environment?
It's the same as in real life, but you have to be more intentional, right? So I'm not going to run into you in real life. So we have to set up some sort of casual one-on-one now and again to shoot the breeze. We have to take an advantage of having 5 minutes or 10 minutes as a ritual before the beginning of a meeting to kind of like do a little icebreaker situation to remind ourselves that we're all humans here. As a leader and a manager, you need to be so mindful about when you're communicating, to whom you're communicating, checking in with quick tests, how you're doing. You as a leader, kind of making sure that you're clear with what your folks are working on, having check-ins, having one-on-ones, caring about people, but also checking on the work. All of those things, kind of basic management hygiene, are in play when you're remote, but in a much more, let's say, I would say, rigorous way.
Before we move into the close, I encourage everyone to go out and grab a copy of the book because it is so instructional. It is just is steeped in wisdom and lived experience. Is there anything we haven't mentioned that we should address in the context of leading self, leading others, leading organization, Alisa, that you want to leave the leaders with before we move into the close?
Yes. One last thing about my book is that I have 14 scripts in the back of the book to help you with delicate conversation. So, what we've been talking about is your inner life, right? How do you lead yourself? And then it's like, it's getting clear with yourself. And then it's about leading other people and about leading the business. But then once you get to the point where you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to do or say, all my clients say to me, but then what should I say? And then I'll, kind of tell them, well, how about this? La, 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 plunk. And they're like furiously taking notes because once you're getting yourself into the mental and emotional state to do it, it's very helpful to have the words in front of you. So, you can crib my scripts. I have additional scripts on my website if you go to alisacohn.com/scripts to help you get your mouth around the words of having delicate or difficult conversations.
I love that. We had the wonderful Kim Scott on the show, of course, who authored the book Radical Candor and spoke in depth about the importance of having those conversations, those candid conversations. You have such incredible, rich experience and a really strong peer group. I was really privileged to be to be in that peer group recently when we were in the US, and it's not only there's not only great conversations that are had, but it's also great fun. So I'm looking forward to that again in the future. Can you share with our audience, Alisa, 3 timeless takeaways?
Three, that's a high bar. Three timeless takeaways. Let's see what shows up. I think the first timeless takeaway is these are all cliche because that's what timeless takeaways are. You're going to regret the things you didn't do more than you regret the things you did. So whatever is in your mind's eye, right this second, find a way to take a first few steps because it's going to make you feel proud of yourself and it's going to ultimately take you in the direction of your dreams. That's number one. Number two, number two is something like have perspective, that gratitude and your experiences of appreciating what you have in your life will help you overcome a lot of issues that people have, which are envy, frustration. So when you focus on what you do have, that really helps you kind of like deal with like life's slings and arrows, I would say. Um, the other, it's funny because I have a I had a second one, which has now like slipped my mind. So I'm going to tell you my last one and then I may come back for a fourth. But the other timeless, what do you call it?
Takeaway. Timeless
Timeless
takeaway.
takeaway. Timeless takeaway is you have to believe in yourself and then act like it. And I said that on the end of the Tim Ferriss show, and I still think it's true today. Remember to believe in yourself and then act like it. And that's also going to help you propel yourself forward. And I think all of these are essential because they really, everything that's important starts in your inside, in your inner life, as an idea, as a hope, as a dream, and as a possibility. And when you feed those possibilities, they're going to be able to take root.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Love those. Do you have a fourth?
I had a fourth. I'm sure it's going to come to me as soon as we get off this
That's
podcast.
just
But
me. That's just me being greedy at this stage.
I know. Yeah.
Alyssa, I love your book.
Thank you.
What else is up with you at the moment? What's next for you?
Well, I mean, what's next for me is I'm going to be speaking at Web Summit in Vancouver in end of May. So please,
Amazing.
if you're there, come and say hi. Yeah. I'm also working on something called the Entrepreneurial Playbook for an entrepreneur community founded by the billionaire media mogul here in New York. And so he's building a clubhouse and like an event series. And so I'm excited to be part of that. And I just got engaged.
Oh, congratulations. Good on you. Show
Thank
me.
you.
Show me the did you
Yeah.
did
Do you want to see my
oh,
ring?
beautiful, beautiful. It's very rude to ask a lady to for her to show you her ring, but there we
It's so
go.
funny because half the time I say, "Oh, I just got engaged," and then I hold my hand up with the ring as in like it's like a receipt. See, I have the receipts.
Well, congratulations, and
Thank you.
your partner has very good taste. The ring is beautiful. So,
Thank you.
if people want to find out more, Alyssa, about your wonderful work, how best to connect with you?
Come to my website, alisacohn.com/scripts, ALISACOHN.com/scripts to download my 5 scripts to help you have delicate conversations and one to make your life better. And then you can also join my newsletter list and you can also follow me on LinkedIn and all the socials. And it's just my name, Alisa Cohn.
Brilliant. Well, I was very excited for today. It lived up to my expectation. Great fun, loads of wisdom in that, loads of value for our listeners. Alyssa, I wish you every success in your book and everything that you're doing. Anyone who comes into your world will be richer for it. So I wish you every success. Thank you for coming on to the show today. Take care.
Thank you so much. It was such a great conversation.